Thanks for joining us for Fox 32's Election Day coverage. You are getting the inside scoop by joining us online. I'm Natalie Bomke.
And I'm political editor Mike Flannery.
Polls are closing right now, but we may already have a glimpse at results using what we know about voter turnout. The latest number from the city of Chicago, just over 37% turnout, with more than 571,000 ballots cast. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about what you learned today regarding voter turnout.
Yeah, for much of the early voting this fall, Natalie, turnout in the city of Chicago appeared to lag several percentage points behind the statewide average. We're still waiting for final numbers. Those numbers you said were as of 5 p.m. The Chicago Board of Election Commissioners is still thinking that by the time all the vote by mails are counted, it'll be close to 50%. They reported bigger vote totals in a number of North Lakefront wards and on the northwest side. The southwest side's 19th ward with Beverly, Morgan Park, and Mount Greenwood led them all with 56% turnout at 5 p.m. Now, it was a couple hours ago. The south and west side wards reported turnout percentages by sharp contrast in the 20s and 30s as a percent of the total.
Okay, so let's break this down. We have 50% potentially voter turnout for the city of Chicago. Is that particularly high for an election like this?
Well, for a normal midterm, it is. The statewide average, though, 4 years ago, driven by supporters and foes of Donald Trump, in 2018, that turnout was 57% statewide. And, in 2014, 4 years before that, the midterm election before that, it was 49%. So that's pretty much average.
We're kind of falling in the middle. And I want to talk also about some of these areas where we saw high voter turnout. We're talking about an area of the city that's predominantly Republican, and an area of the suburbs
with more Republicans
with more Republicans than Democrats
than elsewhere
than elsewhere in the city of Chicago. And then we saw DuPage County had a pretty significant turnout where there's potentially more Republicans than Democrats.
And that led, the DuPage was leading the city earlier in the day. We're waiting for the final numbers. And, it's worth noting what were people making a decision on. The Associated Press paid for this survey called VoteCast, which surveyed more than 90,000 voters nationwide, Natalie. It was conducted for the AP by the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center, and it found half of voters said inflation factored significantly in their vote. That, of course, has been a focus of Republicans criticizing President Joe Biden. Slightly fewer than that number citing inflation, 44% cited the future of democracy as their primary consideration, their number one thought in casting a ballot.
And as we know, Democrats on the campaign trail have been drilling down on that. Democracy is on the ballot. That's what they've been repeating over and over again. Surprising to me, though, that only 50% of voters put inflation at the top of their list.
Right.
I would think more than that.
Right. And but if you're looking for your number one reason, and apparently crime is down that list. We're going to be drilling down with that survey. But 90,000 voters across the country. That's a pretty comprehensive survey.
In the latest polling, let's look at this, showed Governor Pritzker ahead by a hefty margin, and we just looked at the results. Of course, the polls just closed here 7 minutes ago, so we have 0 to 0%. We don't have any results in the gubernatorial race just yet, but we have live coverage as the governor watches results tonight.
Yes, and as you can see, that check mark shows that the Associated Press has declared J.B. Pritzker reelected, gets a second term, his lease on the executive mansion in your hometown of Springfield renewed. And he'll be sworn in again, is what they're saying, in January.
Which is interesting because it's still 0 to 0, Mike. So I'm not seeing any fluctuation there.
Well, let's see what the reaction is down in the South Loop. We have our reporter Dane Placco there. I'm sure there must be some smiles on the faces. I'm sure, Dane, they're waiting for real numbers, though.
Yeah, Mike, just moments ago, one of the big screens behind me put that AP projection up, and there was a bunch of cheering that broke out in the room, chants of JB. The room is filling up with Pritzker supporters. We are at the Marriott Marquis near McCormick Place. Let me step out of the way and give you a little sense of what the room looks like. I'm going to use the word big a lot here. They have several big TV screens in front of a very big stage, and this is a very big room. At least 200-300 people here now, and room for many more. Very nice setup. They're spending a lot of money, which money has certainly been a big part of the Pritzker story on the campaign trail. A lot of people from the Chicago area, political figures here, as well as a number of folks who worked on Pritzker's campaign. Now, we're told the governor has arrived here at the hotel earlier today. He voted at the Chicago History Museum in Lincoln Park, then did some last-minute campaigning, including a stop at Manny's Delicatessen. That's a good luck tradition for hundreds of Illinois politicians over the years. The governor certainly left nothing to chance for his reelection money-wise, as I said, spending $152 million of his own personal fortune on this campaign. I spoke a few minutes ago with his campaign spokesperson, Natalie, who says they'll wait until they have solid direction on how the numbers are looking before making any decisions tonight on when the governor will speak. But she also talked about the governor's last couple days on the campaign trail and why he was campaigning even as the polls opened today.
Before we were at Manny's, we did 30 events this weekend all across the state, in the Metro East, in Springfield, all across, because every single vote counts. And JB's commitment 4 years ago was to be a governor for all, and that doesn't stop until the polls close. We're going to make sure every single voter knows how to vote, every single voter knows what's at stake, and every single voter understands that this is really one of the most important elections of our lifetime. And JB believes that, and so he's going to be out until the bitter end.
Well, as you mentioned before, AP has already called this race seconds after the polls closed in Illinois in favor of J.B. Pritzker. But, of course, the ballots haven't even been counted yet. That's starting now. And it will be interesting if, in fact, Pritzker does win to see whether he's able to beat the spread that he had in his first election win, I should say, over Republican Bruce Bonner. He won that race by 16%. A lot of people we're talking to here tonight think it's going to be closer than that, although they don't think it's going to be a particularly close race. One other observation, the security here. I've been covering campaigns in Illinois for close to 40 years. I have never seen security at a political event like we have at the Marriott Marquis tonight. They have penned us into a specific area at the back of the ballroom here, the media. But the people coming here tonight they're doing bag checks. They're being wanded. There's magnetometers. It's interesting. I've never seen that happen before. I don't know whether it's because there's been some sort of threat that we don't know about towards the campaign, or if it's just a sign of the times. Probably the latter. But again, this is some of the tightest security I've ever seen at a state-level political race. That's the story here at the Marriott Marquis. Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Dane.
That was fascinating, wasn't it? And see, only on Fox 32 do you get that kind of analysis behind the scenes.
Right, and I haven't. I have never seen that kind of security. I hope that everything goes well there, stays safe. We do have another live reporter standing by, Natalie.
That's right. Pritzker's Republican challenger, State Senator Darren Bailey, watching results downstate in my hometown of Springfield. And Casey Cronus joining us live from the Crowne Plaza Hotel and Convention Center with reaction from his campaign. Casey?
And Natalie and Mike, I don't think many people in this room know yet that the AP has just called this race. Chances are they will stick around until those vote totals do come in. Now, the doors to this watch party for Darren Bailey opened just 1 hour ago. His campaign team tells us that more than 1,000 people reserved tickets, but so far about 250 to 300 people have trickled in, and someone has just taken the stage here to start this watch party for us, so we will keep an eye on that. Now, the state senator has yet to make an appearance in this room at the convention center, but we do know he is in the building along with his running mate Stephanie Trussell. Bailey, a farmer turned politician, spent the last several days crisscrossing the state and making his final appeal to voters. This morning, he greeted commuters at Ogilvie train station downtown before visiting Aimtron Corporation, an electronics manufacturer in Palatine. Bailey has focused his campaign on crime, education, Second Amendment rights, his pro-life views, and the economy. And despite falling behind in polling ahead of Election Day, he and his campaign team say they are confident victory awaits them.
One of the big messages of our campaign has been about jobs, right? And about Darren helping to bring these good paying jobs back to Illinois. And so that's what he was focusing on when he was at the factory earlier today. And just an encouraging support from folks of whether they're, farmers, factory workers, cab drivers, folks all across the board who are excited to really make a change in how our state works.
And they are certainly not resting here. The person who was just on stage just said, let's get excited. Basically, let's get this party going here so we can predict that the people here will be watching those vote totals coming in very closely despite that AP prediction. Reporting live in Springfield, Casey Cronus, Fox 32, Chicago.
Thank you, Casey. And I want to dig into that just a moment here. We don't have any votes counted, at least, put out into the public yet on the gubernatorial race. So how can the AP make a call like that?
The short answer is I don't know.
Okay.
It's possible that they had people at key polling places all day long. They did an exit survey. I don't know. I do know that Governor Ron DeSantis has been declared the winner by Fox in Florida. I know some other governor's races are being called in Senate races. Marco Rubio is being called a winner over Val Demings in Florida. They're doing it with at least a few votes in those places. But here, so sit tight, folks. If you're a Bailey supporter, maybe there will be a surprise. It has happened, Natalie, as you well know, that some of these calls get reversed.
Exactly. And, some saying maybe the pollsters were incorrect leading into this election. Let's talk about the balance of power, because you mentioned Senator Marco Rubio, and we already have some national results as far as the control of the Senate goes. Now, either party needs 51 to control the Senate, 51 seats, that is. Democrats have gained 2 seats. They now sit at 38. Republicans have gained 5 seats. They now sit at 34. Before today, we had essentially a 50-50 split among both parties, with the vice president being the tiebreaker, but we could really see some changes here as far as balance of power goes.
So Republicans need to get 51 seats to take control. Democrats, because Kamala Harris presides over the Senate and casts a tie-breaking vote, they only need 50.
Let's break this down a bit more. Let's start with some of these Senate races, and we want to begin in Illinois, of course. Mike, do you want to read the numbers here?
We have incumbent Tammy Duckworth facing Kathy Salvi. She's a Lake County lawyer. She grew up in Waukegan. She's married to Al Salvi.
Okay, and these
this has been Tammy Duckworth. That check mark means AP has called her the winner. Now with about 1% of the vote in, Kathy Salvi's leading her better than 2-1, but boom. Now, just across State Line Road in Indiana there, Todd Young, the incumbent Republican senator, 64%. Tom McDermott, the mayor of Hammond, at 36%. This was one of the most lopsided contests financially. Todd Young raised, as of mid-October, more than $15 million. McDermott had about 1.2 million.
Wow. And finally, our neighbors to the north, Wisconsin, and polls there close at 8, Mike.
Yes, and we have Ron Johnson, who has been a very close ally of Donald Trump, been a polarizing figure. There are people who love Ron Johnson, people who despise him. Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes is the Democratic nominee there. After having been very, very close in the last few weeks, this contest, according to the polling, opened up, and Johnson had a 5, 6, 7-point lead, depending on which of the surveys you trust.
All right, let's talk now about some of those very tight races in other states that we're watching for balance of power. And we want to start out in Arizona. And Mike, there was word earlier today that in Maricopa County, Arizona, some of the voting machines were not working properly, and so it was going to take them a little longer to count those ballots. And so that's obviously of concern to the voters, but polls in Arizona close at 8, so we don't have any results just
yet. We
don't,
and that's Mark Kelly, the astronaut, married to Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who was shot in the head and has gradually been coming back, versus Blake Masters there. So that's one of the ones we're going to be watching to see who controls the Senate, as you said, Natalie.
Let's move on to Pennsylvania. Dr. Mehmet Oz against John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor there. These results could be delayed for days.
Well, Illinois has vote by mail ballots can arrive until November 22nd. That's the cutoff. Pennsylvania has a similar situation. And if this is closer than 87-13 with 3% in, I assume this is coming from parts of Philadelphia or that part of the state. If this is a close contest, we may not know for days or weeks.
And then finally in Georgia, Mike, they have a unique way of selecting a candidate that often leads to a runoff.
Yes, so you got to get 50% plus one. On the right there, you see the incumbent, Raphael Warnock. Reverend Warnock is facing off against Herschel Walker, the famous football player. Again, he was Walker endorsed by Donald Trump, a series of controversies in his private life about abortion, and a son has denounced him, and all of that. But he's been much closer than that in voter opinion surveys. We got about a third of the vote in.
I think within the margin of error in those pre-election day polls, and 30% reporting. I mean, that's a pretty significant amount there in Georgia.
Right, but again, where is it from? Where are those numbers from?
Right.
So we'll wait and see. That's one that we may be biting our fingernails later in the evening, Natalie, till we know. Till we know who's who, but that is one contest. If Reverend Warnock gets reelected, that's a good sign for Democrats in a state like Georgia that was very heavily Republican and now has become a swing state.
Well, we're going to keep our eyes on it here. Thanks for joining us for this special web edition of Fox 32 News on this election day.
We'll see you back here at 8 p.m. when we'll discuss some of the big local congressional contests. We have 4 big ones here that could decide who the next Speaker of the House is. We'll be there at 8 p.m.